The worst part about being rejected by 3 alphas at once wasn't the humiliation. It was knowing she'd have to stand there and smile through all of it. Her name was called like a death sentence. Omega Sera Ashwood approached the throne. The grand hall of the Crimson Palace stretched before her like a gilt-edged nightmare, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers catching firelight that turned everything the color of fresh blood. Hundreds of wolves lined the space, nobles in silk and velvet, watching her with the detached curiosity people reserved for public executions. Sera's bare feet made no sound against the cold floor as she walked forward. The ceremonial gown they'd given her was simple white linen, designed to show submission, purity, acceptance of whatever fate the mate bond decreed. Her dark hair hung loose down her back because bound hair suggested a wolf with something to hide. She had plenty to hide, just nothing they'd think to look for. At the end of the long walk, 3 thrones sat elevated on a dais carved from black stone. And on those thrones sat the reason her hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter how hard she tried to steady them. The Triplet Alpha Kings. Dorian, Dante, and Rhys Blackthorne. They were identical in the way that made artists weep and enemies hesitate. All 3 had inherited their father's brutal beauty, sharp jawlines and dark hair that caught the light like raven wings, broad shoulders that spoke of violence barely leashed beneath expensive clothing, but their eyes gave them away as individuals. Dorian, the eldest by minutes, had eyes like winter storms, gray and merciless. He sat in the center throne with the kind of stillness that made prey animals freeze. Dante, the middle son, watched her with eyes the color of old gold, burning with intelligence that missed nothing. He leaned back in his throne like a predator pretending to be bored. Rhys, the youngest, had eyes like dark honey, warmer than his brothers, but no less dangerous. He was the only one who met her gaze directly as she approached, and something flickered across his expression too fast to name. Sera stopped at the base of the dais and dropped into the required curtsy, her knees touching stone, her head bowed so her hair fell forward like a dark curtain. The position left her neck exposed, vulnerable, an instinctive show of submission that made her wolf whine with distress. "Rise." Dorian's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The kind that made wolves obey before their brains caught up with their bodies. She stood slowly, keeping her eyes downcast like she'd been taught. Good Omegas didn't challenge alphas with direct eye contact. Good Omegas understood their place in the hierarchy. Good Omegas accepted their fate with grace and gratitude. Sera had spent 23 years learning to be a good Omega. Tonight, she was about to find out if the performance had been worth it. Omega Sera Ashwood. Dante spoke this time, his voice smoother than his brother's, honey over steel. "Do you understand why you've been summoned to the Crimson Palace?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice came out steady, despite the hammering of her heart. The mate bond ceremony. The moon goddess revealed the connection between us during the lunar eclipse 3 nights ago. "And do you understand what that bond means?" Rhys asked. His voice held something the others didn't. Gentleness, maybe. Or pity. Sera's stomach twisted. "It means the goddess has chosen us for each other, that our souls are matched, that we're meant to rule together, to strengthen the bloodlines, to be completely fucking unsuitable for 3 kings who need political alliances more than divine fairy tales." Dorian's interruption cut like a blade. "Yes, Omega Ashwood, the bond exists. We all felt it during the eclipse." The admission sent a shock through the assembled nobles. Whispers erupted like wildfire. A true mate bond with the Triplet Kings. It was the stuff of legends, prophecies, the kind of bond that appeared once in 1,000 years. Sera's wolf surged forward, desperate, hopeful. Then Dorian continued speaking, and hope died. "However," he said, his storm-gray eyes finally meeting hers with nothing but cold calculation, "the needs of the kingdom must outweigh personal desires, no matter how inconvenient. You come from a minor pack with no political power, no strategic territory, no bloodline advantages that would benefit the crown. Each word landed like a physical blow. "You're pretty enough," Dante added, and somehow that felt worse than outright cruelty. "Sweet, probably. You'd make someone a perfectly adequate mate, just not us." Rhys said nothing, but his jaw clenched tight enough that muscle jumped beneath his skin. The hall had gone silent. Every wolf present was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. "Therefore," Dorian continued, rising from his throne with liquid grace, "we have gathered witnesses to formally invoke the rejection right. You will be compensated according to royal law, given lands and title sufficient to find a suitable mate elsewhere. This is not meant to be cruel, Omega Ashwood, simply practical." Sera's vision blurred at the edges. The mate bond she'd felt 3 nights ago. The electric shock of recognition that had stolen her breath when the eclipse reached totality. The certainty that she'd found her place in the world after 23 years of being told she'd never amount to anything because of her weak bloodline. All of it was being dismissed as impractical. "Do you understand the terms being offered?" Dante asked. His golden eyes studying her face like she was a puzzle he was mildly interested in solving. She understood perfectly. They'd never wanted her. The bond was real, but love didn't matter when you were raised to see people as political chess pieces. She was a pawn trying to play in a game reserved for kings. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to accept the rejection gracefully. Take the lands and title they offered. Disappear into quiet obscurity, and maybe eventually find some minor alpha who didn't mind that she'd been rejected by the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. The smart thing was to bow her head and fade away. Sera lifted her chin and met Dorian's storm-gray eyes directly. "I understand completely, Your Majesty." Her voice rang clear across the silent hall. "You're absolutely right. This bond is inconvenient and impractical. And I should be grateful you're offering compensation instead of just throwing me out like unwanted garbage." Something flickered in Dorian's expression. Surprise? Irritation? "So let's make this simple," she continued, and a smile curved her lips that felt nothing like joy and everything like freedom. "I, Sera Ashwood, accept your rejection." The gasps from the crowd were audible even over the sudden roaring in her ears. Accepting a rejection wasn't unusual. What happened next was... "Furthermore," Sera said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I reject all 3 of you in return. I reject the bond, the marks, the connection the moon goddess tried to forge between us. I want nothing from you. Not your lands, not your titles, not your pity compensation." Dorian's eyes widened fractionally. "You can't..." "I can." She took a step forward, something wild and reckless unfurling in her chest. "You taught me that tonight, Your Majesty. If you can reject a true mate bond for political convenience, then I can reject you for being exactly the kind of wolves I'd never want to be bound to anyway." "Sera." Rhys stood suddenly, his honey-dark eyes wide with something that looked like panic. "Wait, you don't understand what you're..." "I understand perfectly." She turned that terrifying smile on him. "I'm free." The word hung in the air like a blade about to drop. Then Dorian made a sound. Low, strangled. Nothing like the controlled king who'd sat on that throne moments ago. His hand went to his chest, pressing hard against his sternum like something was trying to claw its way out from the inside. Dante sucked in a sharp breath, his golden eyes going wide with shock. That's not how rejection feels." Rhys dropped back into his throne, his face gone pale. "Oh, goddess! What did we..." But Sera didn't stay to watch them unravel. She turned and walked back down that long hall with her head high and her spine straight, while behind her, the 3 most powerful alphas in the kingdom discovered that rejecting a true mate bond had consequences, especially when she rejected them back. The bond didn't break. It inverted, and now, instead of being bound to serve them, they were bound to want what they could never have again. Her. The palace corridors blurred past Sera like a fever dream. She didn't run. Running would suggest fear, would give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd broken something inside her. Instead, she walked with measured steps. Her bare feet silent on marble that felt like ice, her white ceremonial gown trailing behind her like a ghost. Behind her, Chaos erupted in the throne room, raised voices, shouting, the crash of something heavy hitting stone. She didn't look back. The bond twisted in her chest like a living thing, but it felt different now. Wrong. Instead of the warm pull toward completion she'd felt during the eclipse, this was sharp and hungry, like hooks dragging backward through her ribs. Not painful exactly, just present in a way that made her constantly aware of the 3 wolves she'd just walked away from. "Miss Ashwood!" A servant appeared from a side corridor, young and wide-eyed. "Please, you can't just... The kings require..." "The kings," Sera said quietly, "can require whatever they want. I don't serve them anymore." The girl's face went pale. "But the transition protocol, royal law states that after a rejection ceremony, both parties must remain in the palace for 7 days to ensure the bond breaks cleanly. If you leave the grounds before..." "Before what?" Sera stopped walking, turning to face the trembling servant. "What happens if I leave?" The girl swallowed hard. The bond could go rogue, become unstable. People have died from improperly severed mate bonds, miss. The magic needs time to settle, especially with a bond as strong as... She cut herself off, realizing she was speaking too freely. 7 days. 7 days trapped in the same palace as 3 alphas who'd just publicly humiliated her. 7 days of whatever this inverted bond was doing to all of them. 7 days of pretending she was fine when everything inside her felt like broken glass. "Where are my quarters?" Sera asked finally. Relief flooded the servant's face. "The Rose Wing, miss. 3rd floor, east side. I'll show you. Just point me in the right direction. I'd like to be alone." The girl gestured down a hallway that branched left, then scurried away like she couldn't escape fast enough. Sera made it to the Rose Wing before her composure cracked. The quarters were beautiful in the way that felt like an insult. Silk curtains, a 4-poster bed large enough for 3 people, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking moonlit gardens. Everything pale pink and cream and soft, designed for an Omega who would be grateful for the king's attention. An Omega who would smile and submit and never, ever talk back. The scream that tore from her throat shattered that illusion along with a decorative vase on the side table. Sera's wolf surged forward, desperate to shift, to run, to do something with the volcanic pressure building under her skin. But shifting without permission in the royal palace was grounds for imprisonment, and she'd used up all her defiance for one night. Instead, she collapsed onto the bed and let herself feel everything she'd held back in that throne room. The humiliation of being called adequate, the rage at being dismissed like a political inconvenience, the hollow ache where the mate bond should have settled warm and right, now twisted into something that felt like hunger without satisfaction. And underneath it all, the terrifying relief that she'd actually done it. She'd rejected them back. A knock at the door made her bolt upright, hastily wiping her face. "Miss Ashwood?" A different voice this time, male, older, formal. "I'm Chancellor Voss. His Majesty King Dorian has requested your presence in the private council chamber." Sera's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "Tell His Majesty that I'm practicing being impractical. I'm sure he'll understand." A pause. Then, carefully, "Miss Ashwood, this isn't a social call. There are legal matters regarding the rejection that require your signature. The transition protocol is royal law for a reason. If you refuse to cooperate, the consequences..." "Fine." She stood, smoothing her ruined gown with shaking hands. "Give me 5 minutes." She used those 5 minutes to splash cold water on her face and braid her hair into a crown that felt like armor. If they wanted to treat her like a legal inconvenience, she'd play the part. Cold, professional, unmoved. The private council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less intimidating. Dark wood panels, a long table scattered with documents, and 3 alphas who looked like they'd gone to war and lost. Dorian stood at the head of the table, his storm-gray eyes bloodshot, his perfect appearance cracked at the edges. His jacket was unbuttoned, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Dante paced near the windows, his golden eyes tracking her with unsettling intensity. He'd removed his formal coat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. Rhys sat in a chair that looked too small for his frame, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and the raw pain in his honey-dark eyes made her breath catch. "Sit," Dorian ordered, gesturing to a chair across from him. Sera remained standing. "What do you want?" "What did you do?" Dante turned from the window, his voice sharp with something that sounded like panic. "What the fuck did you do to us?" "I accepted your rejection." She kept her voice steady, cold. "Exactly as requested." "That's not—" Rhys stood abruptly, the chair scraping against stone. "You did something else. Something more. The bond isn't broken, Sera. It's worse." The use of her first name without title or formality sent electricity down her spine. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar." Dorian's voice was soft, dangerous. He moved around the table with predatory grace, stopping just outside her personal space. Close enough that she could smell him. Pine and winter storms, and something uniquely alpha that made her wolf whine. "You feel it too." "Don't pretend you don't." She did feel it. The pull toward him was magnetic, wrong, like her body wanted to move closer while her mind screamed to run. The bond that should have dissolved into nothing was instead a living wire between them, crackling with energy that had nowhere to go. "You rejected me," Sera said, meeting his storm-gray eyes without flinching. "In front of hundreds of witnesses. You called me inadequate and impractical and not good enough for you, so I gave you exactly what you wanted. Freedom." "This isn't freedom." Dante's voice came from directly behind her, and she hadn't even heard him move. "This is torture." She spun to face him, and the movement brought her within inches of his chest. His golden eyes were wild, pupils dilated, his breathing shallow like he'd been running. "Every time you move," he said quietly, "your scent gets stronger. Every time you speak, I want to hear it again. And it's not supposed to be like this, Sera. Rejected bonds fade. They don't—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "They don't burn hotter," Rhys finished from across the room. "They don't make you feel like you're starving even though you just ate. They don't make every other omega in the palace smell wrong." Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's not my problem." "Isn't it?" Dorian was suddenly there, his hand catching her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. The touch sent lightning through her nervous system, and she hated that her body betrayed her with a sharp intake of breath. "You did this deliberately. Some kind of omega trick to—" She slapped his hand away with more strength than she knew she possessed. "I'm not the one who rejected a true mate bond for politics. You want someone to blame? Look in a mirror." The silence that followed was explosive. Then Dante laughed, but it sounded jagged, broken. "She's right. We did this to ourselves." "Shut up!" Dorian snapped. "No!" Dante moved to the table, bracing his hands against the wood. "We rejected her because she wasn't politically advantageous. Because Father said the prophecy was nonsense and we needed strategic marriages to secure the borders. Because we've spent our entire lives being told that feelings are weakness and true mates are fairy tales for common wolves." "Dante," Rhys warned. "And now the bond won't break." Dante's voice rose, something wild creeping into his tone. "Now it's wrapped around my throat like a noose, and every second she's not near me feels like suffocation. And I can't—" He slammed his fist onto the table hard enough to crack the wood. "I can't fucking breathe." Sera took a step backward, her mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Rejection was supposed to sever the bond cleanly, leave both parties free to move on. She'd researched it obsessively in the 3 days since the eclipse, reading every text she could find in her Pax Modest library. Nowhere had it mentioned this. "The prophecy," she said slowly. "What prophecy?" All 3 alphas went still. "Forget it," Dorian said flatly. "That's not your concern. Everything about this bond is my concern now." Sera moved to the table, scanning the documents scattered across its surface. Most were standard rejection protocols, but one caught her eye. Old parchment, the ink faded but still legible, covered in text that made her blood run cold. "When 3 are made 1, and 1 is made 3, the rejected queen shall set them free." Bound by choice instead of fate, love forged in fire shall seal their fate. You knew. The words came out as a whisper. You knew there was a prophecy about our bond, and you rejected me anyway. Rhys moved to stand beside her, and she could feel the heat of him even without touching. Our father said it was a manipulation, that minor pacts spread rumors of prophecies to social climb, to force powerful alphas into unsuitable bonds. So you just assumed I was lying? Sera's vision blurred with rage. That I somehow manipulated the moon goddess herself into creating a false bond. We assumed, Dorian corrected coldly, that the risks of believing in fairy tales outweighed the political reality of running a kingdom. And now? She turned to face him, this alpha who looked like a king but acted like a coward. What's the political reality now that the bond won't break and you're all suffering the consequences? Dorian's jaw tightened. Now we endure 7 days of transition protocol and hope the magic settles into something manageable. And if it doesn't? Then we learn to live with it. His storm-gray eyes held hers. All of us. The implication was clear. She was trapped here as much as they were, bound by royal law and inverted magic neither side understood. 7 days in the same palace as 3 alphas who rejected her but couldn't let her go. 7 days of this electric torture that made every breath feel like foreplay and warfare combined. 7 days to figure out what she'd accidentally unleashed when she'd accepted their rejection with a smile. Fine, Sera said, her voice hard. 7 days. But understand this. I'm not here because I want to be. I'm not going to make this easier for you. And when those 7 days are up, I'm leaving this palace and never looking back. She turned to walk away, but Rhys caught her wrist. The touch burned like brand, and they both gasped at the intensity. What if you can't? He asked quietly. What if none of us can walk away? Sera pulled free, cradling her wrist against her chest. Then I guess we'll all learn what it feels like to want something we can't have. She left them standing there. 3 kings brought to their knees by a bond they'd tried to break, and an Omega who'd turned their rejection into a weapon. The door closed behind her with a sound like finality. In the council chamber, Dante looked at his brothers with wild eyes. What do we do? Dorian's expression was carved from stone. We survive the next 7 days. Then we forget this ever happened. But Rhys was staring at the door where Sera had disappeared, his hand still tingling from where he'd touched her wrist. What if I don't want to forget? He whispered. Neither of his brothers had an answer for that. The first morning in the Rose Wing, Sera woke to the smell of pine and winter storms invading her room. Her eyes snapped open. The windows were closed. The door was locked. But Dorian's scent wrapped around her like invisible hands, so vivid she could almost feel his presence in the shadows. She sat up, heart racing, and realized with cold horror that the bond was tracking him. Her newly awakened senses could pinpoint his exact location, 3 floors up, in what must be the royal quarters, probably pacing if the restless energy bleeding through the connection was any indication. She could also feel the other 2. Dante somewhere in the eastern wing, his golden-eyed intensity focused on something that made the bond hum with concentration. Rhys closer, maybe in the gardens below, his gentler presence tinged with a melancholy that made her chest ache in sympathy before she could stop herself. No, Sera said aloud, throwing off the silk sheets. Absolutely not. She couldn't spend 7 days feeling their every emotion, tracking their movements like some kind of supernatural stalker. There had to be a way to shut this down, to build walls between herself and the bond that refused to break properly. A knock interrupted her spiral. Miss Ashwood? A different servant this time, female, older, with kind eyes that had seen too much. Breakfast is served in the Rose Wing dining room. I'm Marina, assigned to assist you during your stay. Sera opened the door, grateful she'd fallen asleep in the simple cotton dress Marina had provided last night after the council meeting. I don't need assistance. Nevertheless, Marina's smile was gentle but firm. Royal protocol requires that all guests— I'm not a guest. I'm a prisoner of magical bureaucracy. Marina's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. Then consider me your jailer who brings excellent coffee and doesn't ask uncomfortable questions. Despite everything, Sera felt her lips twitch. Does the coffee come with answers about inverted mate bonds? No. But it comes with whiskey if you ask nicely. Marina stepped into the room, carrying a tray that smelled like heaven. Fresh bread, fruit, and a pot of coffee that might actually make the next 7 days survivable. Though, between you and me, I'd save the whiskey for day 3. That's when things typically get interesting. Sera took the coffee cup like a lifeline. Has this happened before? The bond inverting? Marina set the tray on the small dining table near the windows, her expression carefully neutral. In my 40 years serving the royal family, I've seen 3 rejection ceremonies. 2 broke cleanly within the 7 days. The third, she paused. Well, that's a story best saved for when you've had more coffee. Tell me now. The older woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. The third rejection involved the previous king, the current king's uncle. He rejected his true mate for a political marriage, and the bond inverted just like yours. 7 days of transition turned into 7 months of madness. By the end, he was so obsessed with the Omega he'd rejected that he abdicated the throne to be with her. Sera's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. What happened to them? They lived quietly in the countryside for 20 years before he died in a border skirmish. She followed him 3 days later. Heart just stopped beating, the healers said. Broken mate bonds are fatal eventually, even when both parties want to make it work. The implication settled over Sera like a shroud. So either the bond breaks in 7 days, or we're all trapped in this torture until it kills us. Or, Marina said carefully, you stop fighting it and accept what the moon goddess clearly intended. They rejected me first. The words came out sharper than Sera intended. They called me inadequate in front of hundreds of witnesses. Why should I forgive that, just because they're suffering now? Marina's expression softened with something that looked like pity. I didn't say you should forgive them, miss. I said you should stop fighting the bond. Those are 2 very different things. Before Sera could respond, the door burst open without warning. Dante stood in the doorway, his golden eyes wild, his chest heaving like he'd run the entire length of the palace. He was dressed in training gear, sweat-soaked and disheveled, and the sight of him sent an unwanted spike of heat through Sera's body. Marina vanished from the room so quickly Sera wondered if she'd ever been there at all. You can't just barge into my quarters, Sera said, proud that her voice remained steady. Your scent. Dante's voice was rough, strained. It's everywhere. In the training yards, the corridors, the council chambers. How are you doing this? I'm not doing anything. I'm standing here drinking coffee and minding my own business. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she could see the fine tremor in his hands. Liar. You're broadcasting through the bond. Every emotion, every thought. Do you have any idea what it's like to be sparring with the royal guard and suddenly feel your anger spike, your fear, your... He cut himself off, jaw clenching. My what? Sera challenged, taking a step closer despite every instinct screaming to maintain distance. Say it. Your desire. The words came out barely above a whisper. You're not as unaffected as you pretend, Sera. The bond works both ways. Heat flooded her face. Get out. Make me. Something dangerous glinted in his golden eyes. You've spent all morning broadcasting emotions through the bond like a beacon. If you can invade my head, I can invade your space. I didn't ask for this. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of porcelain and dark liquid. I didn't ask to feel you 3 all the time, to know exactly where you are, to wake up drowning in your scents. You did this when you rejected me for not being good enough. You think I don't know that? Dante's voice rose to match hers. You think I don't replay that throne room scene every fucking hour and wonder what kind of idiot rejects a true mate because his father said it wasn't politically convenient? The raw honesty in his words stole her breath. Then why did you? She asked quietly. If you knew it was wrong, Why did all three of you stand there and— Because we're cowards. Rhys's voice came from the doorway, softer than Dante's but no less intense. He stepped into the room, his honey-dark eyes finding hers across the space. Because we've spent our entire lives being told that feelings are weakness and duty is everything. Because when the bond hit during the eclipse, it terrified us. Sera's throat tightened. I wasn't trying to trap you. We know. Rhys moved closer, his presence somehow calming the electric chaos Dante had brought. But knowing something logically and feeling it emotionally are different things. In that throne room, all I could think about was how much power you'd have over me if I accepted the bond, how vulnerable it would make me. So you chose cruelty instead. The words tasted like ash. Yes. The simple admission hung between them. And now we're paying for it. Dante laughed, but it sounded jagged. Paying for it doesn't begin to cover it. I can't focus, can't eat, can't think about anything except the Omega we destroyed, and whether there's any possible way to— Don't! Sera cut him off, something cracking in her chest. Don't you dare say you want to fix this. You can't unring that bell. You can't take back what you said in front of the entire court. What if we could? Rhys asked. What if there was a way to reverse the rejection? There isn't. Dorian's voice from the doorway made them all turn. The eldest king stood there in full formal dress, his storm-gray eyes cold and controlled, despite the bond screaming that he was anything but calm. I've had the court scholars researching all night. Once both parties formally reject the bond, it's severed permanently. What we're experiencing now is residual magic that will fade in the remaining 6 days. Residual magic, Sera repeated flatly. Is that what you're calling this torture? Dorian stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt too small for 4 people with a broken bond crackling between them. What would you call it? Consequences. She met his storm-gray eyes without flinching. You wanted to be free of an inconvenient mate bond. Congratulations. You're free. The fact that freedom hurts doesn't make it any less what you asked for. And what about what you asked for? Dorian moved closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You rejected us back with a smile, Sera. You looked me in the eye and said you wanted nothing to do with us. Was that a lie? The question pierced something vital. Because it had been a lie, at least partially. In that throne room, devastated and humiliated, she'd rejected them out of pride and self-preservation. But the bond didn't care about pride. Her wolf didn't care about politics. And her treacherous body definitely didn't care that these 3 alphas had broken her heart before it even had a chance to fully form. It doesn't matter what I wanted, she said finally. You made your choice. I'm just living with it. For 6 more days. Dante's voice held an edge of desperation. And then what? You walk away and we all pretend this never happened? That was your plan, wasn't it? Sera looked between the 3 of them. Dorian with his rigid control, Dante with his wild honesty, Rhys with his gentle devastation. Reject the unsuitable Omega, do the 7-day transition, move on to appropriate political marriages. That was before we understood what rejection would actually do, Rhys said quietly. Before we understood what you actually are, Dorian added, and something in his tone made her spine straighten. What I am? Sera's laugh came out bitter. I'm exactly what you called me, minor pack, weak bloodline, politically useless. You're a catalyst. Dorian pulled a worn scroll from his jacket, unrolling it to reveal text that matched the prophecy she'd seen last night. The scholars found references in older texts. When 3 alphas share a true mate bond and that mate possesses latent power, the rejection can invert the magic. Instead of severing the connection, it amplifies it. Sera's blood turned to ice. Latent power? I don't have any power. Don't you? Dante gestured around the room. You're broadcasting emotions through a bond that's supposed to be broken. You made all 3 of us unable to focus on anything except you. You walked into our minds and took up residence like you've been doing it your whole life. I didn't mean to, but you did. Rhys's honey-dark eyes held hers. Which means somewhere in your bloodline, there's power that's been dormant, and our rejection woke it up. The room spun around her. This wasn't possible. She came from a minor pack, descended from wolves who'd never shown any special abilities beyond basic shifting. Her parents had died when she was young, and her grandmother who raised her had been kind but ordinary. Hadn't she? This is insane, Sera said, backing away from all three of them. You're making excuses because the rejection didn't work the way you wanted. I'm not some magical catalyst. I'm just an omega you didn't want. Past tense, Dante said softly. Didn't want. But now you're stuck with me for 6 more days and trying to reframe it as destiny instead of consequences. She moved toward the door, needing space, needing air, needing anything except 3 alphas looking at her like she was simultaneously the problem and the solution. I'm going to the gardens, alone. And if any of you follow me, You'll what? Dorian's voice stopped her at the threshold. Use your newfound power to force us away? Go ahead, Sera. Let's see what else you can do that you claim you're not doing. The challenge in his words ignited something in her chest. The bond flared hot and bright, and suddenly she could feel them. Not just their locations, but their emotions, their desires, their barely controlled need that made her own body respond in ways that terrified her. She could feel Dorian's rigid control cracking, his storm-gray exterior hiding a desperate hunger he refused to acknowledge. She could feel Dante's wild honesty, his golden-eyed intensity focused entirely on her in ways that made her skin burn. She could feel Rhys's gentle devastation, his honey-dark warmth trying to soothe the chaos his brothers created while fighting his own losing battle with want. And underneath it all, she could feel her own power responding. Not magic, exactly. Something more fundamental. The ability to sense them, influence them, draw them closer, or push them away with nothing but intention. No, she whispered, horror flooding through her. No, I won't. The power retreated like a startled animal, and the bond's intensity dimmed to bearable levels. All 3 alphas were staring at her with expressions that mixed shock and something that looked uncomfortably like reverence. That, Dorian said slowly, is not the response of a powerless omega. Sera turned and ran. She made it to the gardens before her legs gave out, collapsing onto a stone bench surrounded by night-blooming roses that reminded her of the cruel irony of being housed in the Rose Wing. Beautiful prison for a rejected queen. Except she wasn't powerless, wasn't ordinary. And these 3 alphas who'd rejected her were starting to look at her like she might be exactly what the prophecy promised. A catalyst that could either save them or destroy them all. The palace lockdown began at midnight on the 4th day. Sera woke to sirens wailing through the corridors, the sound sharp enough to drag her from dreams that had been far too focused on storm-gray eyes and honey-dark warmth. She scrambled out of bed, pulling on a robe as Marina burst through the door without knocking. "Rogue attack on the eastern border," the older woman said, her usual calm replaced with crisp efficiency. "Standard protocol. All palace residents confined to secure wings until the threat is neutralized." How long? Could be hours. Could be days. Marina was already moving through the room, checking windows, ensuring locks engaged properly. "You're to remain in the Rose Wing. Guards are posted at every entrance. Don't try to leave." She was gone before Sera could ask more questions. The bond immediately flared with alarm that wasn't her own. She could feel all 3 alphas responding to the crisis. Dorian's cold, tactical assessment, Dante's aggressive readiness for violence, Rhys's concern bleeding through stronger than his brother's, concern for the palace, for their people, for her. Sera pressed her palm against the window, watching torchlights move across the distant walls. Rogue wolves were dangerous, unpredictable, driven mad by broken bonds or exile. They attacked in packs, using numbers to compensate for lack of organization. The palace guard would handle it. They always did. She repeated that to herself as minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The bond kept her aware of the alpha's movements, coordinating defenses, directing troops, maintaining the kind of leadership that made kingdoms function even under threat. Then everything changed. The explosion hit the eastern wall with enough force to rattle her windows. Sera's breath caught as the bond flooded with Dante's sudden pain, sharp and immediate. Not fatal, but enough to make her stumble backward from the window. "No," she whispered, pressing her hand against her chest where the phantom pain echoed. "No, you don't get to do this to me." But the bond didn't care about what was fair. It dragged her awareness toward the eastern wall where Dante was bleeding, where Rhys was shouting orders, where Dorian's rigid control was cracking into something that felt like fear. The door to her quarters slammed open. Rhys stood there, breathing hard, blood splattered across his face from someone else's wounds. His honey-dark eyes found hers with desperate intensity. "We need to move you, now." What happened? Not rogues. He was already across the room, grabbing her arm with a grip that burned through the bond. Assassins. Someone used the rogue attack as cover. The Rosewing isn't secure anymore. Sera's training as an Omega kicked in. Don't argue, don't slow them down, survive first and ask questions later. She let him pull her into the corridor where 2 royal guards fell into formation around them. The palace had transformed into organized chaos. Servants hurried past with medical supplies. Guards moved in tight formations. Somewhere in the distance, fighting continued, the clash of metal, shouts, the distinctive snarl of wolves in combat. "Where are we going?" Sera asked as Rhys navigated through corridors that twisted back on themselves. "Safe room, royal quarters. It's the most defensible position." He didn't look at her. His attention split between their route and something else the bond was telling him. Dante's injured, not critical, but enough that he can't fight effectively. Dorian's holding the eastern breach. They reached a section of the palace Sera had never seen, hallways lined with portraits of past kings, doors marked with royal crests. Rhys stopped at one, pressed his palm against the lock, and pushed her inside. The room was massive, a war room from the look of it, with maps covering one wall and weapons displayed on another. A large table dominated the center, covered with reports and tactical plans. Dante sat in a chair near the fireplace, a healer working on his shoulder, blood soaked through makeshift bandages, and his golden eyes were glazed with pain and fury. "About time," he growled when he saw them. "I told you to secure her an hour ago." "I was busy preventing the north wing from being overrun." Rhys released Sera's arm like it burned him. "You're welcome." Sera moved toward Dante before her brain caught up with her body. The healer stepped aside and she could see the wound, deep, jagged, clearly from a blade designed to cause maximum damage. "This needs stitches," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The healer knows what she's doing," Dante replied, but his eyes tracked her movement with predatory focus. "Then why is she using the wrong binding technique?" Sera knelt beside the chair, her hands hovering over the wound. "That's for surface cuts, not deep tissue damage." The healer bristled. "I've been treating royal injuries for 15 years, and I grew up in a border pack where we learned field medicine before we learned to shift." Sera met the woman's indignant stare. "No disrespect, but this needs pressure bandaging and proper sutures, or he'll tear it open the moment he moves wrong." Silence stretched between them until Dante laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "Let her work. I'd rather take my chances with the Omega than bleed out because of wounded pride." The healer gathered her supplies with barely concealed irritation and left. Sera's hands shook as she examined the wound properly. This close, she could smell Dante's scent, old gold and dangerous heat mixing with copper blood. The bond hummed between them, amplifying every sensation until she could almost feel the pain radiating from his shoulder. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." She reached for the medical supplies the healer left behind. "Because if you die from infection, the bond will probably kill me too. Self-preservation, nothing more." "Liar." Her hand stilled. "Excuse me?" "You care." Dante's golden eyes held hers. "You're furious at us. You have every right to be, but you still care whether we live or die. The bond makes that impossible to hide. Sera focused on cleaning the wound, her touch as gentle as she could manage despite wanting to press hard enough to make him feel a fraction of what he'd made her feel. The bond makes a lot of things impossible. Like hating us? I don't hate you. The admission came out before she could stop it. I hate what you did. I hate that you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. I hate that the moon goddess tied my soul to 3 wolves who would rather have politics than... Her voice broke. Dante's hand covered hers, stopping her mid-motion. His touch sent electricity up her arm, the bond flaring hot and bright between them. Then what? He asked softly. What did you think you'd have if we'd accepted the bond? Sera looked at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers. Scarred from battles she'd never know about. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. She pulled away, returning to the work of stitching his shoulder with practiced efficiency. I thought I'd have partners, equals, wolves who chose me because of what we could be together, not despite what I couldn't offer politically. The words hung in the air like exposed wounds. I thought I'd be seen, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Really seen, for the first time in my life. Not as a weak bloodline or a minor pack embarrassment, but as someone worth choosing. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been regret. You are worth choosing. Past tense doesn't count. Present tense. He caught her chin with his uninjured hand, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are worth choosing, Sera. We were just too fucking stupid and scared to do it when it mattered. The door burst open before she could respond. Dorian strode in, bloodied and furious, his storm-gray eyes scanning the room before landing on her with visible relief. You're safe. Were you expecting otherwise? Sera tied off the last stitch on Dante's shoulder with more force than necessary. The assassins were targeting you specifically. Dorian moved to the war table, studying maps with tactical precision despite the blood drying on his hands. 3 separate attempts to breach the Rose Wing. They knew exactly where you'd be. Ice flooded Sera's veins. Why would anyone target me? I'm nobody. You're our mate. Rhys locked the door behind Dorian, his expression grim. Rejected or not, that makes you a political target. Proof of the prophecy, a potential weakness to exploit. Then let me leave. Sera stood, backing away from all 3 of them. Give me whatever protection you think I need and send me somewhere safe. You don't want me here anyway. That's not true. The words came from Dorian, and they sounded like they'd been dragged out of him by force. She laughed bitterly. You rejected me 4 days ago. 4 days ago I was an idiot who thought duty mattered more than destiny. Dorian turned to face her fully, and the raw honesty in his storm-gray eyes made her breath catch. 4 days ago, I didn't understand what losing you would actually mean. And now you do? Now I know that every moment you're in danger, I can't think about tactics or strategy or anything except getting to you. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Now I know that the idea of someone hurting you makes me want to burn down kingdoms. Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. That's just the bond talking. Is it? Dante stood, his newly stitched shoulder apparently forgotten. Because I felt this way before the rejection. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. We all were, Rhys added quietly. They were surrounding her now, not threatening, but present in a way that made the air feel too thick to breathe. 3 alphas who'd rejected her now, looking at her like she was something precious they'd almost lost. You don't get to do this, Sera said, her voice shaking. You don't get to break my heart and then decide you want me back because keeping me is more convenient than losing me. This isn't about convenience. Dorian was closest now. Close enough that she could see gold flecks in his storm-gray eyes. This is about recognizing that we made the worst mistake of our lives in that throne room. Then live with it. She pushed past him, needing space, needing air. Live with the consequences of choosing politics over... The building shook. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness broken only by firelight. Dorian's arms were around her before she could process what was happening, pulling her against his chest as debris rained from the ceiling. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, rapid and strong, his scent wrapping around her like protection. "Stay down," he ordered, but his voice had gentled. "We're under the palace, reinforced walls. We're safe." But they weren't safe. Not really. Because the real danger wasn't the assassins or the explosions or the rogues attacking the eastern wall. The real danger was how right it felt to be in Dorian's arms, surrounded by 3 alphas whose presence made her feel whole despite everything they'd done to break her. The explosion stopped an hour before dawn. Sera sat on the floor of the safe room with her back against the wall, watching 3 alphas who couldn't sit still. Dorian paced near the maps, his tactical mind already planning next moves. Dante tested his injured shoulder with restless energy. Rhys stood guard at the door, listening for threats that hadn't materialized in hours. And through it all, the bond hummed between them like a living wire. "The assassins retreated," Dorian said finally, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Reports confirmed they were hired mercenaries, not rogues. Someone paid them to breach the palace during the attack. "Who?" Sera asked. "That's what we need to determine." He turned to face her, his storm-gray eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "But first, there's something you need to know, about why we rejected you." Sera's stomach tightened. "I already know why. Politics, duty, unsuitable bloodline. That's what we told you." Rhys moved away from the door, his honey-dark eyes finding hers. "It wasn't the whole truth." "Then what was?" The 3 brothers exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Dante spoke. "Our father arranged marriages for all 3 of us before we were born. Political alliances with the 3 most powerful packs bordering our territory. The daughters of those alphas have been raised, knowing they'd become our queens." Sera's breath caught. "You're already promised to someone else." 3 someone else's, Dorian corrected. "And when the mate bond appeared during the eclipse, our father gave us a choice. Honor the bond and start a war with 3 allied packs, or reject you and maintain peace." The room spun around her. "So you chose peace." "We chose wrong." Rhys's voice was quiet but firm. "We chose survival over soul, and we've regretted it every moment since." "But there's more," Dante added. "The prophecy we mentioned. Our father didn't just dismiss it as fairy tales. He actively suppressed it because it predicted something he couldn't control." Dorian pulled an old scroll from inside his jacket, unrolling it carefully. The parchment was ancient, covered in text that made Sera's skin prickle with recognition. "When 3 are made 1, and 1 is made 3, Dorian read aloud, "the rejected queen shall set them free. Bound by choice instead of fate, love forged in fire shall seal their state. She who carries the lost bloodline shall break the chains of power's design." Sera stood slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not from a minor pack with weak bloodline." Rhys moved closer, his expression gentle despite the weight of his words. "Your grandmother didn't just raise you, she hid you." "From what?" "From us." Dorian's storm-gray eyes held hers. "Your real name isn't Sera Ashwood. It's Seraphina Moonwhisper, last surviving heir of the original ruling pack. The bloodline that held the crown before my family took it 3 generations ago." The floor dropped out from under her. "That's impossible. The Moonwhispers were executed. Everyone knows that." "Almost everyone." Dante's voice was gentle for once. "Your grandmother escaped with you when you were 3 years old. She used old magic to suppress your scent, altered your appearance slightly, gave you a new identity. She died protecting that secret when you were 5. Sera's legs gave out. She sank back to the floor as memories crashed through her mind with brutal clarity. A woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a language she didn't understand. Running through forests at night, always running, always hiding. Her grandmother's last words before strangers came. Forget everything. Be small. Be safe. She made me forget, Sera whispered. She suppressed my memories along with my bloodline. To protect you, Rhys said, because if our father knew who you really were, he would have killed you himself. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not only had these alphas rejected her for being unsuitable, but she'd been exactly what they needed politically all along. If they'd accepted the bond, if they'd bothered to look deeper than surface-level bloodlines, they could have had everything. Does your father know now? She asked. He knows the mate bond appeared, Dorian replied carefully. He doesn't know about your true bloodline, yet. But he suspects, Dante added. Why else would assassins target you specifically? Someone wants you dead before you can remember who you are and claim what's rightfully yours. Sera laughed. But it came out broken. What's rightfully mine? I don't want a crown. I don't want to rule anything. I just wanted... Her voice cracked. I just wanted to be chosen for me. You were chosen. Rhys knelt in front of her, his honey-dark eyes intense. The moon goddess chose you for us. We were just too blind to see the gift we'd been given. Don't. Sera pushed to her feet, needing distance from all three of them. Don't pretend this is about the mate bond or destiny or any of that. You rejected me because I was politically inconvenient. Now you want me back because I'm politically valuable. It's the same calculation, just different numbers. That's not true, Dorian said. Isn't it? She turned on him, fury rising to replace the devastation. If I was still just Sera Ashwood from a minor pack, would you be here confessing your regrets? Or would you be going through with those arranged marriages while I suffered through the bond alone? The silence that followed was answer enough. That's what I thought. Sera moved toward the door, but Dante blocked her path. You're right, he said simply. If you were still just Sera Ashwood, we'd probably be trying to endure the bond until it faded enough to function, but that doesn't mean we don't genuinely regret what we did. Regret isn't the same as change. No, it's not. Dante's golden eyes burned with intensity. But maybe change is possible. Maybe we can become the wolves who deserve you instead of the wolves who destroyed you. And if you can't, then we lose you completely, Rhys's voice came from behind her. And we spend the rest of our lives knowing we rejected the only thing that ever mattered. Sera felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why are you telling me this now? Why not 3 days ago when we might have had time to figure something out? Because 3 days ago we were still trying to convince ourselves we'd made the right choice, Dorian admitted. Because the assassins forced us to face the possibility of losing you permanently, and that made us realize we'd rather die trying to earn you back than live safely without you. Pretty words, Sera said, but words don't rebuild broken trust. No, Dorian agreed. Actions do, so let us protect you. Let us prove that we're capable of choosing you over politics and duty and our father's expectations. And then what? I'm supposed to just forgive everything that happened in that throne room? No. Rhys moved to stand beside his brothers, all three of them facing her now. You're supposed to let us earn forgiveness over however long it takes. Months, years, however long you need to believe that we see you now. The real you, not the bloodline or the prophecy or the political advantage, just Sera. The way he said her name, like it was something sacred, made her chest ache. I need time, she said finally. Time to process everything you've just told me. Time to remember who I really am. Time to decide if any of this is salvageable or if we're all just trapped in a bond that's going to slowly destroy us. How much time? Dante asked. I don't know. Sera looked at each of them in turn. Dorian with his storm-gray intensity, Dante with his golden fire, Rhys with his honey-dark warmth. But you don't get to rush me. You rejected me in minutes. I get to take all the time I need to decide if you're worth accepting back. Dorian nodded slowly. Fair enough. The door unlocked from the outside, guards signaling that the palace was secure again. But nothing felt secure anymore. Not with prophecies and hidden bloodlines, and 3 alphas looking at her like she held their salvation in her hands. Sera walked out of the safe room into dawn light that felt too bright after the darkness. Behind her, 3 kings stood in the ruins of their choices, finally understanding what they'd thrown away. Sera found Rhys in the garden at sunset on the 6th day. He sat alone on a stone bench, surrounded by moonflowers just beginning to open, his head bowed, shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. The posture looked wrong on an Alpha King, especially one built like Rhys with his broad frame and natural strength. She'd spent 2 days processing everything they'd told her. 2 days researching the Moonwhisper bloodline in the library Marina had quietly directed her toward. 2 days remembering fragments of a childhood she'd been forced to forget. Silver-haired grandmother, songs in the old tongue, running through forests with magic crackling at her fingertips. 2 days of the bond growing stronger instead of weaker as the 7-day deadline approached. "You're bleeding," she said, announcing her presence. Rhys looked up, surprise flickering across his honey-dark eyes before he glanced down at his hands. His knuckles were split, bruised, like he'd been hitting something without bothering to wrap them first. "Training accident," he said, which was clearly a lie. Sera sat beside him without asking permission, reaching for his damaged hands. He tried to pull away, but she held firm, examining the injuries with the same clinical focus she'd used on Dante's shoulder. "These aren't from training," she said quietly. "These are from punching a wall." Rhys was silent for a long moment. "The East Garden wall, solid stone, I don't recommend it." "Why?" "Because I needed to feel something physical instead of—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Sera pulled supplies from the small medical kit Marina had started leaving in her quarters. "Talk to me, Rhys." He watched her clean his knuckles with careful touches, his expression unreadable. "I keep replaying that moment in the throne room, the look on your face when Dorian said you were inadequate. I stood there and said nothing while my brother destroyed you with words." "You all destroyed me," Sera said softly. "Not just Dorian." "I know, but Dorian and Dante at least owned their cruelty. I hid behind silence and let them do the damage while telling myself I was being kind by not adding to it." His laugh came out bitter. "Coward's morality." Sera wrapped his knuckles with practiced efficiency, her touch gentle despite everything. "Why didn't you say something? In that throne room, why didn't you defend me?" "Because I was terrified." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "The bond hit me hardest during the eclipse. I felt everything you felt, your hope, your fear, your desperate need to be chosen. And it was so overwhelming that all I could think about was how much power you'd have over me if I let myself feel that deeply. So you chose nothing instead. I chose safety over soul." Rhys turned his hand over in hers, his palm up, vulnerable. "And I've regretted it every second since." Sera stared at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, scarred from battles, and now bruised from punishing himself for failures he couldn't undo. The bond hummed between them, gentler than it felt with his brothers, but no less intense. "I was raised to believe alphas were supposed to be strong," Rhys continued. "That showing emotion was weakness, that needing someone made you vulnerable to manipulation. My father beat that lesson into us from childhood." "Beat?" Sera's eyes snapped to his. "Metaphorically." "Mostly." Rhys's smile didn't reach his eyes. He's old school royal, believes that Alpha Kings need to be harder than stone and colder than winter. Any softness gets trained out early. "That's not strength. That's trauma masquerading as leadership." "I know that now." He met her gaze directly. "Watching you walk away after accepting our rejection with your head high. That was real strength. You felt everything we made you feel and chose dignity over breaking down, while I stood there hiding behind my brothers because I was too afraid to feel anything at all." Sera finished wrapping his hands, but she didn't let go. "You're feeling now. Too much. Too late." Rhys's voice roughened with emotion. "I feel you every moment, Sera. Your anger, your pain, your confusion about everything we told you about your bloodline, and underneath it all, I feel your loneliness. The part of you that wants to trust us but can't, because we proved we don't deserve it. Tears burned behind Sera's eyes. Stop. Why? It's true. He raised his bandaged hand to her face, his touch feather-light against her cheek. You've spent your whole life being told you weren't enough, not powerful enough, not connected enough, not valuable enough. And then 3 idiots confirmed every terrible thing you'd ever been taught to believe about yourself. Rhys. I can't undo what happened in that throne room, he continued, his honey-dark eyes bright with unshed tears of his own. I can't take back the silence that let you think I agreed with my brother's cruelty, but I can tell you the truth now. You were never inadequate, never unsuitable. Never anything except exactly what we needed, and we're too fucking broken to accept. The tears escaped despite her best efforts to contain them. Why are you saying this? Because tomorrow is the 7th day. The transition period ends, and you'll be free to leave the palace, free to walk away from us completely. His thumb brushed away her tears with devastating gentleness. And before you go, I need you to know that at least one of us sees you. Really sees you. Not the bloodline or the prophecy or the political complications. Just Sera, the woman brave enough to reject 3 kings and strong enough to survive what we put you through. I don't feel strong, she whispered. That's because real strength doesn't feel like armor. It feels like choosing to be vulnerable even when vulnerability has only ever brought pain. Rhys leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. It feels like sitting in a garden with an alpha who doesn't deserve your kindness and bandaging his hands anyway. The bond flared between them, but different than before. Not the desperate hunger she felt with Dorian or the wild intensity Dante brought. This was warmth, comfort, the aching tenderness of 2 wounded souls recognizing each other. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sera said honestly. I know. I don't know if this bond can be fixed or if we're all just delaying the inevitable. I know that too. Then why are you here? Why are you looking at me like... Her voice broke. Like you're everything? Rhys smiled sadly. Because you are. And even if you walk away tomorrow and I never see you again, I need you to carry the knowledge that you mattered. That rejecting you was the worst mistake of my life. That I'd spend eternity earning your forgiveness if you'd let me. Sera's hands trembled as she reached up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin, the realness of him. You hurt me. I know. You broke something inside me that might not heal. I know. His eyes closed, pain etched across his features, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, nothing like the explosive passion the bond seemed to demand. It was gentle and aching, tasting of salt tears and desperate hope. Rhys's bandaged hands came up to frame her face with careful reverence. Like she was something precious he was terrified of breaking further. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. That wasn't forgiveness, Sera whispered against his lips. I know. It was just, I needed to feel something that wasn't anger or pain or confusion. I know. Rhys kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the bridge of her nose with feather-light touches. Take whatever you need from me, Sera. I'm yours, even if you never claim me. The vulnerability in those words cracked something in her chest. This Alpha King who'd been trained to show no weakness was offering her everything. His heart, his truth, his soul, with no guarantee she wouldn't destroy him with it. Tomorrow I have to decide, she said quietly. Stay and try to build something from these ruins. Or walk away and let the bond fade into something we can all live with. What do you want to do? Sera looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the royal title and the alpha strength to the man underneath. The one who punished himself for failures he couldn't undo. The one who felt too much and had been taught that feeling was weakness. The one whose honey-dark eyes held hope even though he had no right to expect anything from her. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But right now, in this moment, I just want to sit here with you and pretend the world doesn't exist outside this garden." Rhys pulled her close, tucking her against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Then, that's what we'll do." They sat together as sunset faded to dusk, moonflowers opening around them, the bond humming with fragile possibility. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even forgiveness. But it was a moment of peace in the chaos. And sometimes that was enough. Sera woke on the 7th morning to find a crown on her pillow. Not a request, not a gift, a statement. The crown was ancient silver, worked with moonstone and inscribed with text in the old tongue. Her grandmother's crown. The one that should have passed to her mother, then to her, if 3 generations of Blackthorns hadn't stolen the throne through violence. She was still staring at it when Marina entered without knocking, her weathered face pale. "You need to come with me," the older woman said. "Now! Don't ask questions, don't pack anything, just come." Sera's stomach dropped. What happened? The king knows. Marina was already pulling clothes from the wardrobe, tossing them at Sera. "About your bloodline, about the prophecy. He's Zhao owning, calling Zhao owning Zhao. He's ordered your immediate execution for treason against the crown." The world tilted sideways. How? Does it matter? Marina helped her dress with shaking hands. "The princes are in emergency council trying to delay him, but their father is the king. His word is law. You have maybe an hour before royal guards come for you." Sera's mind raced. The 7th day, the end of the transition period. She was supposed to choose today whether to stay or leave. Instead, she was running for her life from the father of her mates. "Where can I go?" "There's a passage beneath the rose wing. Old escape route from before the palace was expanded. It leads to the forest beyond the eastern wall." Marina pressed a small bag into her hands. "Supplies, money, enough to get you to the border if you move fast?" "Marina, don't thank me yet. Just survive." The older woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And know that some of us never forgot what was stolen from your family." They moved through corridors that were too quiet, too empty. The usual bustle of palace life had been replaced by an oppressive silence that made Sera's skin crawl. Guards should be everywhere. Servants should be moving through morning routines. Instead, nothing. They reached a tapestry in the rose wing's lowest level. Marina pulled it aside, revealing a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. "Go!" she urged. "Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't—" "Marina." "Stop." Sera's hand closed around the older woman's wrist. "Why are you helping me?" Marina's weathered face crumpled. "Because I served your grandmother before the Blackthorns took the crown. Because I watched them slaughter your family and couldn't stop it. Because I've spent 20 years watching you grow up in hiding, and I'll be damned if I let history repeat itself." Sera pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Thank you. Save your thanks for when you're safely across the border." Marina pushed her toward the door. "Now go before—" The explosion of splintering wood echoed through the corridor. Royal guards poured in from both ends, crossbows raised, silver-tipped bolts aimed directly at Sera's chest. At their center stood a man who could only be the king, older than his sons but no less imposing. His eyes cold gray storms that held no warmth, no mercy. "Serafina Moon Whisper," King Aldrich said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You are under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and crimes against the crown. Surrender peacefully or be executed where you stand." Marina stepped in front of Sera, her aged body a fragile shield. "She's done nothing wrong. She exists." The king's words were ice. "That's crime enough." Sera's mind spun with desperate calculations. The escape route was blocked. Guards surrounded them. Even if she fought, Marina would die in the crossfire. The only way out was through. and through meant facing a king who'd ordered her family's execution once before. "Let Marina go," Sera said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your quarrel is with me." "Sera, no," Marina started. "She's an old woman who served my family out of loyalty, not treason," Sera continued, stepping around Marina to face the king directly. "Let her walk away. I'll come peacefully." King Aldrich studied her with calculating eyes. "You have her face, your grandmother's. She stood exactly like that when I ordered her execution, proud and foolish until the end. Then you know I'm not going to beg. No, you're going to die." He gestured to the guards. "Take her to the execution chamber. Immediate sentence, no trial, no witnesses beyond what's necessary. The Moon Whisper line ends today." The guards moved forward, and Sera prepared to fight, even though fighting meant dying faster. Better to go down fighting than on her knees. Then Dorian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stand down." The command carried such authority that the guards actually hesitated, torn between their king and their princes. Dorian, Dante, and Rhys filled the opposite end of the corridor, all three in full royal regalia, all three looking like avenging angels carved from violence. "This doesn't concern you," King Aldrich said coldly. "Return to your quarters." "Like hell." Dante's golden eyes blazed with fury. "You want to execute our mate? You go through us first." The king's expression didn't change. "Your rejected mate. The bond was severed 6 days ago. She has no claim to your protection. We're claiming her anyway." Rhys moved forward, positioning himself between Sera and the guards. "The rejection was a mistake. We're formally invoking the reclamation right." Sera's breath caught. The reclamation right was ancient law, rarely used, that allowed rejected mates to reclaim their bonds within the 7-day transition period. But it required unanimous consent from all parties and explicit public declaration. It also meant permanent bonding, no takebacks, no second rejections. "You can't be serious," King Aldrich said, something like shock cracking his icy composure. "You're willing to throw away 3 political alliances, destabilize the entire kingdom, start wars with our bordering packs, all for a girl whose family tried to destroy ours? Her family ruled with honor for 5 generations before you betrayed them," Dorian said, his voice deadly quiet. "And yes, father, we're willing to risk everything to correct the worst mistake we ever made." "Then you're fools." The king's face hardened. "And I'll execute all 4 of you for treason." "Try it." Dante's shift was instantaneous. One moment human, the next a massive golden wolf with fangs bared and murder in his eyes. "See how many guards are willing to die protecting a king who orders the death of his own sons?" The corridor erupted into chaos. Guards shifted, some moving to protect the king, others backing away from the princes they'd served since childhood. Marina grabbed Sera's arm, trying to pull her toward any possible escape route. And through it all, the bond between Sera and the 3 brothers exploded with intensity that made her gasp. She could feel their desperation, their determination, their willingness to die rather than let her be executed. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, terrifying in its completeness. "Stop!" Sera's voice rang out with power she didn't know she possessed. "Everyone stop!" And they did. Every wolf in the corridor froze, responding to a command that came from somewhere deeper than words. Her bloodline, perhaps. The old magic her grandmother had suppressed finally awakening under extreme stress. Sera stepped forward, away from Marina's protective grip, walking toward the king with her head high. "You want to execute me because you're afraid of what I represent," she said, her voice carrying unnatural authority. "Afraid that the kingdom will remember your family stole the crown through murder. Afraid that your sons chose love over duty, and proved that your iron rule creates nothing but misery." "Careful, girl," King Aldrich warned. "I'm done being careful." Sera stopped directly in front of him, meeting his cold gray eyes without flinching. "You can kill me right now. Execute your sons when they fight to protect me. Maintain your crown through violence and fear like you've always done. But the kingdom will know. Every pack, every wolf, every rejected mate will hear the story of how you murdered the true heir because she dared to inspire your sons to choose differently. Or The king's voice was dangerously soft. Or you let me walk away, right now. No execution, no guards, no pursuit. I leave the kingdom and take the threat I represent with me. Sera's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. Your sons return to their arranged marriages. The political alliances remain intact. Everything goes back to the way you wanted it. No. Dorian's voice was raw. Sera, don't... It's the only way you all survive, she said. Not looking at him, because if she did, her resolve would shatter. The only way the kingdom doesn't tear itself apart. Acceptable, King Aldrich said immediately. Father, you can't... Rhys started. Silence. The king's command cut through his son's protest. The girl has offered terms that benefit everyone. She leaves, you three honor your commitments to the arranged marriages, the kingdom remains stable. Agreed. Sera felt her heart crack down the middle. This was it, the shatter point, the moment where loving them meant letting them go. No. Dante shifted back to human form, naked and furious and magnificent. I don't accept those terms. I choose her. Crown, kingdom, consequences be damned. So do I, Rhys added, moving to stand beside his brother. All eyes turned to Dorian. The eldest brother stood frozen, torn between duty and desire, his storm-gray eyes moving between Sera and his father. The future king, raised from birth to put kingdom before self, faced with an impossible choice. Dorian, King Aldrich said quietly, don't throw away everything we've built for a girl you barely know. I know her well enough. Dorian's voice was hollow. I know she's brave enough to offer her life to save ours. I know she's strong enough to walk away from the bond to protect the kingdom. I know she's everything a queen should be, and everything you taught me queens shouldn't be. Then you know what you have to do. Dorian looked at Sera, and the devastation in his eyes matched the breaking in her chest. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Then he turned to his father. I accept the terms. She leaves. We stay. The words hit like physical blows. Dante made a sound like a wounded animal. Rhys's face went pale with betrayal, and Sera felt something vital inside her simply stop functioning. Then it settled. King Aldrich gestured to the guards. Escort Miss Moonwhisper to the border. Ensure she crosses safely and doesn't return. Sera let them take her arms, guide her down corridors she'd walked for 7 days, lead her toward exile and safety, and a future without the 3 wolves the moon goddess had chosen for her. She didn't look back, couldn't look back, because if she did, she'd see Dorian standing there with everything she wanted reflected in his storm-gray eyes, and she'd break apart completely. Behind her, Dante's anguished howl echoed through the palace, and ahead, the border waited, freedom that felt like death. The border crossing was a stone bridge over a river that marked where the Blackthorne kingdom ended and neutral territory began. Sera stood at its center, watching dawn break over water that looked like liquid gold. The royal guards had left her there with supplies and orders never to return. Behind her, the kingdom that had rejected her twice. Ahead, freedom that felt like amputation. The bond twisted in her chest like a living wound. She could still feel them, Dante's rage burning hot enough to scorch, Rhys's quiet devastation bleeding through in waves, and Dorian was nothing, empty, like he'd carved out whatever part of himself had felt anything and left only cold duty behind. You should keep moving, she told herself, before you do something stupid. But her feet wouldn't carry her across. Wouldn't take that final step into exile. Because despite everything, despite the rejection and the near execution, and Dorian choosing his father over her at the moment that mattered most, she couldn't make herself leave. The bond held her there like chains made of starlight and stupidity. This is pathetic, she said to the empty air. You're better than this. Was she, though? Sera sank down onto the stone bridge, her legs simply giving up on the pretense of strength. She'd spent 7 days being brave, being defiant, being everything except honest about what she actually wanted. She wanted them. All 3 of them, broken and flawed and terrifyingly capable of hurting her again. She wanted Dante's wild honesty, and Rhys's gentle strength, and even Dorian's rigid control that hid an ocean of feeling he'd been taught to suppress. She wanted the life the prophecy had promised, 3 made 1 and 1 made 3, bound by choice instead of fate. But wanting wasn't enough when one of them couldn't choose her back. Movement on the kingdom side of the bridge made her look up. A figure approached on horseback, riding hard, and her heart stuttered with recognition even at a distance. Rhys. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped, practically running onto the bridge. His honey-dark eyes were wild, his hair disheveled, still wearing the formal clothes from the confrontation with his father. "Don't," he said breathlessly. "Don't cross that bridge." Sera's throat tightened. "Your father ordered me to leave." Dorian agreed. "It's done." "Nothing's done." Rhys closed the distance between them, dropping to his knees in front of where she sat. "Sera, please." "Just listen." "To what? More apologies that don't change anything?" "To the truth." His hands framed her face with desperate tenderness. "Dorian didn't choose duty over you. He chose your life over everything else." Sera's breath caught. "What?" "Our father threatened to have you executed right there if Dorian didn't agree to the terms. Not exile, execution. He had guards positioned with crossbows aimed at your heart. If Dorian chose you, you'd be dead before any of us could stop it." The world tilted. "No," Dorian said. "He said what he had to say to keep you alive long enough to get out of the palace." Rhys's voice cracked. "He sacrificed what he wanted most to ensure you survived. It was never about choosing duty. It was about choosing you by letting you go." Tears burned down Sera's face. "Then why didn't he tell me?" "Because our father was listening to every word. Because showing his hand would have gotten you killed anyway. Because—" Rhys pulled her against his chest, his own tears falling into her hair. "Because he loves you enough to be the villain in your story, if it means you get to have a story at all." "Where is he now?" "In the throne room with Father and Dante." Rhys pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "We're invoking the challenge right, ancient law that lets princes challenge the king for the crown if they believe he's unfit to rule." Sera's blood turned to ice. "That's a fight to the death. Or submission, but our father doesn't submit." Rhys's jaw clenched. "It's the only way to stop him from hunting you down the moment you're across the border. If we take the crown, we can change the laws, honor the prophecy, build the kingdom differently. And if you lose, then we lose everything." His smile was sad and fierce. "But at least we lose fighting for something that matters instead of living safely with nothing." Sera's mind raced. The challenge right required all 3 princes to stand together against the king. It was political suicide even if they won. The kingdom would fracture, allied pacts would withdraw support, everything King Aldrich had built would crumble, unless they had something to offer in its place. "The Moon Whisper bloodline," she said slowly. "If I reclaim my family's crown and merge it with yours through the mate bond, we could offer unity instead of division. That's what Dorian's counting on." Rhys stood, pulling her to her feet. "But it only works if you come back. If you choose us even after everything we've put you through." "Rhys, your father will kill me the moment I set foot back in that palace." "Not if we kill him first." The cold voice came from behind them. Dorian stood at the kingdom end of the bridge, and he looked like war-made flesh. Blood splattered his formal clothes, his knuckles were raw, and his storm-gray eyes burned with something that might have been madness or clarity, hard to tell the difference. "The challenge is issued," he said. "Father accepted, but we're not doing this without you, Sera. I won't do it without you." "You chose duty," she said, her voice breaking. "You let me walk away. I chose your life." Dorian crossed the bridge in long strides, and I'd do it again. "I'd choose your survival over my happiness every single time because living in a world where you exist is better than dying in a world where you don't." "That's not a choice. That's martyrdom." "Maybe." His hand cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted the violence in his eyes. But I've spent my whole life making choices based on duty and politics and what benefits the kingdom. For once, I want to make a choice based on what I actually feel. And what do you feel? Everything. The word came out ragged. I feel everything when it comes to you. Terror that you'll walk away. Hope that you might stay. Rage at myself for hurting you. Desperation to earn another chance I don't deserve. And underneath it all, love so consuming it makes me understand why people burn kingdoms for their mates. Sera's breath shattered. You can't say things like that and expect me to think clearly. I don't want you to think clearly. Dorian's forehead pressed against hers. I want you to feel what I feel through this bond. I want you to know that rejecting you was the worst decision of my existence. I want you to choose to come back anyway, even though I've given you every reason to run. Your father will kill us all. Probably. Dante's voice announced his arrival before he appeared, moving onto the bridge with predatory grace. His golden eyes were fever-bright, his shirt torn, evidence of the fight he'd already started. But we'll make him work for it. This is insane, Sera said. You're talking about civil war. We're talking about revolution. Dante's smile was sharp enough to cut. Tearing down a system that treats mates like political chess pieces and building something better from the ruins. And if we fail, then we fail together. Rhys moved to stand with his brothers, all three of them surrounding her now. But at least we fail fighting for what the moon goddess intended instead of the twisted version our father created. Sera looked between them. Dorian with his storm-gray desperation, Dante with his golden fire, Rhys with his honey-dark hope. Three alphas who'd rejected her, broken her, and were now offering her everything including their lives. The smart choice was obvious. Walk away. Let them fight their father without her. Survive. But Sera had spent her entire life making smart choices that kept her small and safe and invisible. Maybe it was time to make a stupid choice that might actually matter. If I do this, she said slowly, if I come back and reclaim my bloodline and stand with you against your father, there's no going back. The mate bond becomes permanent. We're bound for life or death, whichever comes first. Yes, all three said in unison. And you understand that I haven't forgiven you. That trust isn't rebuilt in a single romantic gesture. That choosing to fight beside you doesn't mean everything's fixed. Yes, Dorian said quietly. We understand we'll spend the rest of our lives earning what we threw away, but we're willing to do the work. Even if it takes decades? Especially if it takes decades. Dante's grin was wild. We've got time, assuming we survive the next few hours. Sera closed her eyes, feeling the bond pulling her toward them with magnetic inevitability. The moon goddess had chosen them for each other. The prophecy had predicted this moment, and her heart, despite every logical reason to protect itself, wanted to try. Okay, she said, opening her eyes. Let's go start a revolution. The joy that flooded the bond from all three of them nearly knocked her over. Dorian pulled her into a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope. Dante lifted her off her feet in an embrace that made her ribs protest. Rhys pressed his forehead to hers with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Thank you, Dorian whispered against her hair, for choosing us even when we didn't deserve it. Don't make me regret it, Sera replied. We won't. His storm-gray eyes held promises he intended to keep. Starting with killing my father and taking back what's rightfully yours. They moved as one back across the bridge, four souls bound by choice instead of fate, heading toward a fight that would either kill them or crown them. Behind them, the border waited empty. Ahead, the kingdom burned with possibility. And Sera discovered that stupid choices made with the right people felt a lot like destiny. The throne room had been transformed into an arena. King Aldrich stood at its center, surrounded by royal guards who looked uncertain about whose orders to follow. The ancient king had removed his ceremonial robes, standing in fighting leathers that proved he hadn't forgotten how to be a warrior before becoming a crown. Sera entered through the main doors flanked by three princes who had just committed treason. The assembled court went silent. Hundreds of eyes tracking their movement across marble that had witnessed her first rejection 7 days ago. 7 days that felt like a lifetime. "You're supposed to be across the border," King Aldrich said, his cold gray eyes finding Sera with lethal focus. "I changed my mind." She kept walking until she stood at the base of the dais, where 3 thrones sat empty. "I'm invoking my right as last surviving heir of the Moonwhisper bloodline to reclaim what was stolen from my family." The gasps from the assembled nobles were audible even over her hammering heart. "You have no proof of your heritage," the king said. Sera reached into the bag Marina had given her, pulling out the silver crown that had been left on her pillow. She placed it on her head, and the moment the metal touched her skin, something shifted. The old magic her grandmother had suppressed roared to life, flooding through her veins like liquid starlight. Her eyes blazed with silver light. Her hair lifted on an invisible wind, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 5 generations of stolen queens. "I am Seraphina Moonwhisper, granddaughter of Isabella, daughter of Celeste, heir to the true crown." Power radiated from her in waves that made every wolf in the room instinctively lower their heads. "And I challenge your right to rule through the ancient laws you claim to uphold." King Aldrich's expression finally cracked into something that might have been respect or fear. "You can't challenge me and claim the princes as mates. Choose one." "No." Dorian moved to stand beside Sera, his hand finding hers. "The prophecy states clearly, when 3 are made 1 and 1 is made 3, we're invoking the triad bond, ancient law that predates your theft of the crown." "The triad bond hasn't been performed in 300 years, the king said, "because you outlawed it." Dante took Sera's other hand, the bond flaring hot between them. "Deemed it too dangerous because it creates power that rivals the crown itself. But we're not asking permission. We're telling you how this ends." Rhys completed the formation, his presence settling the chaos into something focused and deadly. "You submit and abdicate peacefully, or we take the crown by force, and you die knowing your own sons destroyed your legacy." King Aldrich laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You think standing together makes you strong enough to defeat me? I've killed wolves more powerful than you for threatening far less." "Then you'll kill your own sons." Dorian's voice was cold as winter. "Is maintaining power worth that price?" "Power is always worth the price." The king's shift was instantaneous. One moment human, the next a massive gray wolf with silver-tipped fur and eyes that held centuries of ruthless survival. The 3 princes shifted in response, forming a protective triangle around Sera. Dorian's storm-gray wolf, Dante's golden warrior, Rhys's honey-dark guardian. They moved with synchronized precision, 3 bodies with 1 mind. But King Aldrich had 300 years of combat experience and nothing left to lose. The fight was brutal and fast. The king targeted Dante first, recognizing him as the most aggressive. His teeth closed around Dante's throat in a move designed to kill, but Dorian slammed into him from the side, breaking the hold. Blood splattered across marble as both wolves tumbled away. Rhys went for the legs, trying to disable rather than kill, but the king twisted with impossible speed and raked claws across Rhys's flank. The honey-dark wolf yelped, stumbling. They were losing. 3 princes who'd trained together their whole lives still couldn't match a king who'd spent centuries eliminating any threat to his power. Sera watched in horror as Dorian took a blow that sent him crashing into the dais steps, as Dante's golden fur matted with blood. As Rhys struggled to stand on an injured leg, the bond screamed with their pain, and something inside Sera snapped. Not broke, awakened. The power that had been sleeping in her bloodline roared to life with intensity that made the throne room shake. Silver light exploded from her body, raw magic that had been suppressed for 20 years suddenly unleashed without restraint. Enough. Her voice wasn't human anymore. It was something older, something that predated werewolf kings and stolen crowns. "I said enough!" Every wolf in the room froze, not because they chose to, because her power commanded it, reaching into their very bones and making submission instinctive and absolute. Even King Aldrich, mid-lunge toward Dorian's vulnerable throat, stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. Sera walked forward, the silver crown blazing with light that matched her eyes. The old magic recognized her, claimed her, transformed her into something between Omega and Goddess. "You killed my grandmother for having power you couldn't control," she said, each word resonating with supernatural authority. "You slaughtered my family because they threatened your stolen throne, and you raised your sons to be as broken and afraid as you are." "Sera—" Dorian tried to speak, but she raised a hand, and he fell silent. "But they're not you." She stopped in front of the frozen king. "They learned what you never could. That real strength isn't crushing everyone who challenges you. It's choosing vulnerability, even when vulnerability has only brought pain." She knelt, bringing herself eye level with the gray wolf that couldn't move, couldn't attack, could only listen. "I could kill you right now," she said softly. "End your life the way you ended my grandmother's. The power is here, the justification is clear." Every wolf in this room would call it justice. King Aldrich's eyes held hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold calculation. Fear, understanding, the recognition that he'd lost everything, trying to keep everything. "But I'm not you," Sera continued, "and I won't build a new kingdom on the same foundation of violence and fear that made the old one corrupt." She stood, turning to address the assembled court. "I claim the crown by right of blood and magic, but I claim it to merge with the Blackthorne line, not destroy it. 3 crowns becoming one, old power and new united through the bond the moon goddess herself decreed." Her eyes found Dorian, Dante, and Rhys. "If you'll still have me." The question hung in the air like a prayer. Then Dorian shifted back to human form, naked and bloodied and beautiful in his desperation. "If we'll have you? Sera, you just saved our lives and offered mercy we don't deserve. The question is whether you'll have us after everything we've put you through." "I asked first," she said, her lips twitching despite everything. "Yes." Dante shifted, limping slightly but grinning like a madman. "Yes, we'll have you. Bond us, claim us, use us however you need to rebuild this kingdom into something worth ruling." "Yes," Rhys added, his honey-dark eyes bright with tears. "For however long you'll tolerate us trying to earn what we should have chosen from the beginning." Sera released her hold on the room. Wolves collapsed, gasping, the sudden return of autonomy after absolute control, leaving them disoriented. King Aldrich shifted back to human form, looking ancient and defeated in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. "The triad bond," she said to the 3 princes. "How does it work?" "Blood, bite, and choice," Dorian said. "Given freely, accepted completely, binding for life. No takebacks?" "No takebacks." His storm-gray eyes held hers. "Are you sure?" Sera looked at them, broken and bleeding and offering everything they had. Then she looked at the throne room full of wolves, watching to see what kind of queen she'd become. Finally, she looked at King Aldrich, defeated but alive, proof that mercy could be stronger than vengeance. "I'm sure," she said. "Let's do this before I remember all the very valid reasons this is a terrible idea." The ritual was older than the kingdom itself. Each prince bit his own palm, then hers, mixing their blood with hers. The bond that had been inverted and painful for 7 days suddenly snapped into alignment with force that stole her breath. She felt them, really felt them, not just emotions bleeding through, but their very souls intertwining with hers. Dorian's rigid control hiding an ocean of feeling. Dante's wild honesty and fierce loyalty. Rhys's gentle strength and capacity for forgiveness she was still learning. And they felt her, the power she'd been hiding, the fear she'd been carrying, the desperate hope that choosing them might actually lead to something beautiful instead of more heartbreak. "I choose you," Dorian said, pressing his bloodied palm to her heart. "For better or worse, for political disaster and prophetic destiny, for every day I have left to prove I can be worthy of this gift." "I choose you," Dante echoed, his palm joining Dorian's, for chaos and revolution and whatever insane adventure comes from binding 3 alphas to 1 omega who's more powerful than all of us combined. I choose you, Rhys finished, completing the triangle. For gentle moments and fierce battles and building a kingdom where rejected wolves never have to choose between love and survival again. Sera placed her hand over all 3 of theirs, the silver crown blazing brighter. I choose all of you, not because the prophecy demands it, or the moon goddess decreed it, but because I've seen you at your worst, and I still want to know what your best looks like. The bond completed with an explosion of silver light that flooded the entire throne room. When it cleared, marks had appeared on all 4 of them, intricate silver patterns that wound around their forearms, visible proof of the triad bond that couldn't be broken or rejected or denied. 3 made 1, 1 made 3, the prophecy fulfilled. King Aldrich stood slowly, looking at his sons with an expression that might have been pride or grief. The crown is yours, he said quietly. Rule it better than I did. Then he walked out of the throne room, an old king whose time had passed, leaving his sons to build something new from the ruins of his legacy. Sera turned to face the assembled court, still wearing her grandmother's crown, flanked by 3 alpha princes who were now permanently hers. Things are going to change, she announced, her voice carrying royal authority and hard-won strength. Starting with laws protecting rejected mates, ending with building a kingdom where power serves people instead of the other way around. The court knelt as one, recognizing their new queen. And in the place where she'd been rejected 7 days ago, Sera stood accepted, chosen, and finally certain that sometimes the best revenge was becoming exactly what they'd been too afraid to claim. 3 months later, Sera woke to Rhys's gentle kiss on her shoulder, Dante's arm slung possessively across her waist, and Dorian watching her with storm-gray eyes that finally looked at peace. "Morning," she mumbled, still half asleep. "Council meeting in an hour," Dorian said, but he made no move to leave the massive bed they'd taken to sharing. "The northern packs are disputing border agreements again." "Let them dispute." Dante nuzzled into her neck. "We have more important things to do." "Like sleep?" Sera asked hopefully. "Like this." Rhys's hand traced the silver mark on her arm, the bond humming contentedly between them. "Reminding you that you're ours and we're yours, and everything we built was worth every impossible moment." Sera smiled, letting herself be surrounded by 3 alphas who'd rejected her, and then spent 3 months proving that second chances could lead to first loves. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still struggled with trust, still had moments where old wounds surfaced, but they were building something real from the ruins of their mistakes, and that, she decided, was better than any prophecy. "Fine," she said, pulling Dante closer while reaching for Dorian, "but we're being late to that council meeting." "Worth it," all 3 said in unison. And as silver light flooded their bedroom, with the bond singing between them, Sera knew they were right. Some things were worth fighting for, some things were worth forgiving, and some bonds, once broken and remade, became stronger than destiny itself. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out, hit subscribe. The next chapter drops soon.